Good morning. How are y'all doing? We're going to start reading chapter 2 today. And chapter 2 is titled Run Like Mad. So make sure that as we're reading that you're looking for themes, central ideas, and social issues. Okay, so chapter 2, Run Like Mad. The rehabilitation of Louis Zamperini began with a key. It was 1931 and Louis was 14. While in a locksmith shop, he had heard someone say that if you put any key in any lock, it has a 1 in 50 chance of fitting. Inspired, he began collecting keys and trying locks. He had no luck until he tried his house key on the back door of the Torrance High Gym. And when basketball season began, no one understood why the stands were so full when so few tickets had been sold. Finally, someone discovered Louis sneaking kids in the back door. Louis was hauled to the principal, who punished him by barring him from all athletic and social activities. Louis, who had never joined anything, didn't care, was indifferent. Pete headed straight to the principal. Louis craved attention, Pete told him, but he had never won it in the form of praise, so he sought it in the form of punishment. If Louis was recognized for doing something right, he'd turn his life around. So Pete is a big part of the reason why Louis changes his life around. Pete asked the principal if he would let Louis join a sport. When the principal refused, Pete asked if he could live with allowing Louis to fail. It was a cheeky thing for a boy to say to his principal, but Pete was that one kid who could get away with such a remark. The principal gave in. Pete had big plans for Louis. A senior in 1931 and 32, Pete was a track star. Having set the school's mile record of 5 minutes and 6 seconds. Watching Louis, whose getaway speed was his saving grace, Pete thought that he saw the same talent. He wanted to make a runner out of him. In the end, it wasn't Pete who got Louis onto a track. It was Louis's weakness for girls. In February, some girls began assembling a team for an interclass track meet, and long-legged Louis looked like he could run. The girls worked their charms, and Louis found himself on the track barefoot. When everyone ran, he followed, churning along with jimmying elbows. As he labored home at last, in last place, he heard tittering. So people are laughing at him because he's coming in last place. Gasping and humiliated, he ran straight off the track and hid under the bleachers. The coach muttered that kid belonged anywhere but in a foot race. From then on, Pete was all over Louis, herding him out to train and riding his bike behind him and whacking him with a stick. Resentful, Louis dragged his feet, bellyached, and quit. Pete made him keep going. He entered Louis in races, and Louis started winning. Pete was right about Louis's talent, but being forced to run made Louis defiant. At night, he listened to the train whistles, and one day in the summer of 1932, he couldn't bear it any longer. It began over a chore Louis's father asked him to do. Louis resisted, and a fight ensued, and Louis threw clothes into a bag and stormed towards the front door. His parents ordered him to stay, but Louis was beyond persuasion. As he walked out, his mother rushed to the kitchen and emerged with a sandwich. Louis stuffed it in his bag and left. He was on the front walk when he heard his name called. He turned around, and there was his father, grim-faced, $2 in his outstretched hand. It was a lot of money for a man whose pay didn't last the week. Feeling a swell of guilt, Louis took it and walked away. He rounded up a friend, and together they hitchhiked to L.A., broke into a car, and slept on the seats. The next day they jumped a train, climbed onto the roof, and rode north. That trip was a nightmare. The boys got locked in a boxcar so hot that they were frantic to escape. Louis found a metal bar, climbed onto his friend's shoulders, and pried open a roof vent, squirmed out, and helped his friend through. Then they were discovered by a railroad detective who forced them to jump from the moving train at gunpoint. For several days they walked. One night, as they sat in a rail yard, filthy, sunburned, shivering, and wet, staring at a stolen can of beans, Louis remembered the money in his father's hand, the fear in his mother's eyes as she gave him a sandwich. He stood up and headed home. When Louis came in the door, Louise threw her arms around him, led him to the kitchen, and gave him a cookie. Anthony came home, saw Louis, and sank into a chair, his face soft with relief. Louis went upstairs, dropped into bed, and whispered his surrender to Pete. He was going to be a runner, and he was going to go all out. In the summer of 1932, Louis did almost nothing but run. On a friend's invitation, he went to a cabin in California's high desert. Each morning he rose with the sun, picked up his rifle, and jogged into the sagebrush. He ran over the hills, over the deserts, and over gullies. He chased bands of horses, trying in vain to snatch a fistful of mane and swing aboard. On his run back after each afternoon, he shot a rabbit for supper. In the morning, he rose to run again. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running from something or to something, not for anyone or in spite of anyone. He ran because it was what his body wished to do, and all he felt was peace. He came home with a mania for running, so he comes home from that summer, and he's running all the time. On Pete's orders, he ran everywhere. He ran his entire paper route for the Torrance Herald, to and from school, and to the beach and back, veering onto neighbors' lawns to hurdle bushes. He gave up drinking and smoking. To expand his lung capacity, he ran to a public pool and dove to the bottom and grabbed the drain plug and floated there, hanging on for a little longer each time. Eventually, he could stay underwater for 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So he's doing all this kind of stuff to get ready for running that season. Pete kept jumping in to save him. He also found a role model. Track was hugely popular, and its elite performers were household names. Among them was Kansas City University miler Glenn Cunningham. So he finds a role model. As a boy, Cunningham was in a schoolhouse explosion, and his lower body was burned so badly that a month and a half passed before he could sit up. Once he could stand, he pushed himself about by leaning on a chair, his legs floundering. Eventually, hanging off the tail of a horse named Paint, he began to run, a gait that initially caused him excruciating pain. But in a few years, he was racing, obliterating his opponents by a length of a home stretch. So Louis gets not only this role model, but this guy who's been through a very traumatic incident, who can't walk because he's been burned so badly, but then eventually, because he doesn't give up, he ends up being a great runner, that guy. So why do you think Louis chose him as a role model? I want you to think about that. Okay, by 1932, Glenn Cunningham was a national sensation, soon to be acclaimed the greatest miler in American history. Now Louis had his hero. In the fall of 1932, Pete entered Compton, a tuition-free junior college where he became a star runner. In the afternoons, he commuted home to coach Louis, perfecting his stride and teaching him strategy. Pete thought that the sprints Louis had been running were too short. He'd be a miler, just like Cunningham. In California, winter-born kids started new grades in January. In the first days of 1933, just before he turned 16, Louis began the 10th grade. When the track season began, he began to set out to see what training had done for him. Competing in black silk shorts that his mother had made from a skirt, he won an 880-yard race, breaking the school record co-held by Pete by more than 2 seconds. A week later, he ran a field of milers off their feet, stopping the watches in 5 minutes and 3 seconds, 3 seconds faster than Pete's record. So he starts track, and immediately he starts off breaking records. By late April, his mile time was way down to 4:42, 4 minutes and 42 seconds. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, read a local paper. Can that guy fly? Yes, that means that Zamperini guy. Louis streaked through the season unbeaten and untested. When he ran out of high schoolers to whip, he took on Pete and 13 other college runners in a 2-mile race at Compton. Though he'd never even trained at distance, he won by 50 yards. This is a picture of him winning at Compton. Okay. Though he'd never even trained at distance, he won by 50 yards. Next, he tried the 2-mile in UCLA's Southern California cross-country meet. Running so effortlessly he couldn't feel his feet touching the ground, he took the early lead and kept pulling away. At the halfway point, he was 1/8 of a mile ahead. So he is when he wins the race, he's half a lap around a track ahead of them. And observers began speculating on when the boy in the black shorts would collapse. Louis didn't collapse. After he flew past the finish, rewriting the course record, he looked back. None of the other runners were even in sight. Louis had won by more than a quarter of a mile. He felt as if he would faint, but it wasn't from exertion. It was from the realization of what he was. So Louis has turned over a new leaf. He's now trying to be a better person, and he's doing that through track. Pete was the one who went to the principal and begged the principal to let him compete in a sport so he could get good attention, not bad attention. So if you're thinking about central ideas, let's think about the central idea here in this second part. So obviously the person who is, so if you answer your questions, who, what, when, where, why, the who of this section, of course, is Louis. What happened to him? He was changed from a kid who was always getting into trouble to being an incredible athlete. When did this happen? It happened when his brother encouraged him to be a miler, and Louis realized that he loved to run. Eventually, he realized he loved to run. So when can be either a time or it can be when something happens. All right, where did this happen? This happened in high school track. Or where did this happen in high school track? And what was the author's purpose, the why? It's to inform us about Louis. So when you make your central idea sentence, you need to combine all of these together into one sentence and start with the why. So you'd start by saying the author informs readers that Louis, and then you add all this in. All right, I'll hear from y'all tomorrow.